If you've been a part of the astrological community sort of at all in the past few years, you've probably noticed a recent swing towards astrological magic, or this sort of weaving together of astrology and magic in one cohesive practice. This is not a new phenomenon, as it's actually thousands of years old. Historically, the celestial influences indicated by the positions of the planets through the practice of astrology were the primary consideration for magical practices and kind of the idea behind how magic worked. The planets did it. This has become much more popular in the past few years after being kind of downplayed within the astrological community itself over the past few decades, where we took more of a sharp turn towards trying to be validated by science and trying to be, statistical and more academic sounding. And you can't do that when you're talking about magic and spirits. Sorry, just can't. So the purpose of this series, even though it is tied to the new and full moons, is not about doing horoscopes for the signs for the lunations. It's not what we're about here. I'm not going to do that. But what it's more for is exploring the astrological weather between the full and new moons for electional purposes. When it comes to astrological magic, there are two main factors. The first one are the materia, basically the ingredients that you need to work any sort of spell or make a talisman. This part tends to be easier. You just look up what you need in the book and you buy it from whatever source you can get it. Simple. Basically just grocery shopping, but with magic. The other part is the timing mechanism, and that is where astrology comes in. What is the best moment to perform this spell? Or what is the best moment to do this ritual to get what I want? And that is what astrology tells us. This is the more difficult of the two paths, because it requires a certain amount of intermediate to advanced knowledge about astrology and how the mechanics of astrology work. It also requires some familiarity with source texts, which is more difficult to access. So that's really the focus and purpose of this series, to explore the timing between lunations to try and discover good charts for astrological magical applications. Finding decent election charts is often the more difficult part of this experience. So hopefully people will use this as a resource to weave in with their own pre-existing spiritual practice to get the best results that they possibly can. One final thing is that I'm more centrally located in the North American continent. So if you're in the United States, Canada, or Mexico, you'll be able to get a lot of use out of the charts that I provide. You'll still need to double check them and put them into your own software for your own locations, and do your best to wiggle the time around to match it as closely as you can with the chart that I show. But it shouldn't be much more than moving it around a few minutes. If you're in other parts of the world, then it may be more difficult to be able to utilize the charts that I show you. Because of that, for when I can, I will offer an alternative for Western Europe. So if you're, in the Western European half of the continent, then those charts will be more useful for you than the first ones that I show. So with that all out of the way, let's go ahead and get started. So here you can see the chart of the full moon for my location. You can see the sun here at 1 degree Scorpio and the moon down here at 1 degree Taurus. It perfects at 1 degree Taurus in 13 minutes. So that would be our tzatziki for this lunation. But this is not the main point of this video. We don't really care about this, because while full moon and new moon magic have become somewhat popular in the past decade and a half perhaps, these are actually really difficult times for the moon to do magic in. So we're not really going to focus so much on the full and new moons themselves throughout this series, unless they just happen to be super fascinating. But what we typically want is we want to clear space between the sun and the moon, usually about 15 degrees. And what we're primarily focused on are the phases of the moon in these. So because we're going from full moon to new moon, we're dealing with the waning phase. And when we're dealing with waning phases, we're typically wanting to release things or diminish things. And this is a good time for letting go of things, for returning things that we've borrowed, or even if you wanted to get kind of nasty, waning moons are really good for, malefic magic as well. And there are going to be different kind of hierarchies of astrological magical practices that will prioritize moon phases higher or lower than one another, and we will kind of talk about that as we go along. But our first chart that we're going to talk about is actually on October 27th. If I can move this too far. And that's going to be at 3:37 a.m. my time. All right. So somewhere around here, 3:37, 3:36. So this chart is for the fixed star Aldebaran, and Aldebaran is currently positioned at 10 Gemini and 1 minute, somewhere around there. And so we have our midheaven here at 9 degrees Gemini and 50 minutes. You can move that up a little bit. You can move that time up a little bit to get it closer, like 10 degrees and 4 minutes at 3:37. But you want it kind of close to that, as close to that minute as you possibly can. And we also see that we have the moon within 5 degrees of the star, which is what I try to shoot for. So that's what we want there. That's our first kind of piece for fixed star talismans. We want the moon to be as close to the star as possible, while the star is on the midheaven up here or on the ascendant right here. So the other part of it, at least for me, is that you want the moon to be applying to a planet that is also the same nature of the star. For Aldebaran, that is going to be of the nature of Mars, and that's why we picked this chart, because we have the moon applying a trine aspect to Mars at 18 degrees Aquarius. So we've kind of met both of our criteria here. Similarly, the Lord of the first house, which is Mercury, is not doing too terribly. It's not badly placed. It's cadent, but it's not in, the difficult 12th or 8th houses. It's not, it's separating from the square to Mars, so that's nice, and it's not really configured with Saturn. So, and it's conjoined Jupiter at the same time. So this is all very helpful for our purpose here. And so the question, I guess, is what would one want to do for an Aldebaran talisman? What's the point? Classically, the point is for increasing riches and bringing honor, which both sound really fantastic. And these could be a great talisman to use for people who are maybe in more competitive professional fields. That's what I meant. But if your workplace environment kind of encourages, a friendly competitive atmosphere, this might be a good way to get ahead of your peers, and it can be great for seeking promotions or otherwise kind of standing out from the crowd in some way. And that's what Aldebaran talismans are for. The material for Aldebaran talismans are going to be either ruby or carbuncles, and carbuncles are kind of the traditional name for garnets. And the herb that you're going to use to offer is going to be milk thistle. Western Europe, there's not going to be a alternative for the Western Europe, and I'll show you why. So for me, I want to see the moon closer to the angle than in this chart. So the moon here is going to be at 3 degrees 43 Gemini, and I managed to get the midheaven right on the star degree. But this is a difference of over 6 degrees, and I'm not okay with that, because I tend to use what's called the 5-degree rule, and the idea is that when a planet is within 5 degrees of a house cusp, it's read as influencing that house. So here we would have a moon that is more than 5 degrees past the midheaven, so this is technically a 9th house moon. And while that's not necessarily bad, I want angular instead of cadent. So that's why there's not really, and if you want to use this, feel free to go ahead and use it. I can't stop you, but I don't really recommend it because the moon is too far from the angle. So that's that one. So the second chart we're going to talk about for this lunation in this video is going to be the chart of Spica's heliacal rising. So heliacal rises are considered special times for stars, and this is the moment when a star first appears from under the sun in the morning. So your basic idea is that as the sun moves through the zodiac, he kind of covers up different stars. We have our kind of winter constellations that are visible during the winter months, then we have our summer constellations that are visible during the summer months. And the why they're visible is because the sun is on the other side of the sky. He's not covering them up. So when they're in the sky, it's nighttime and we can see the stars at night. Go figure. So the same idea kind of applies here, except for this is the moment when a star first becomes visible after a period of being invisible, when the sun's in front of it. So typically with heliacal rises, they'll change depending on the location of the individual on the Earth. So based on your latitude, where you are sort of up or down on the Earth's surface, will change when stars first appear. But when it comes to stars that are very near to the ecliptic, like Spica, they are more similar to one another. They rise really close together. So in my location, this happens on October 31st at around 6:40 a.m. And it should happen very near. I'm having to double check that, but that seems to be the way it works. And for the heliacal rising, what you're really focused on is getting Spica on the ascendant to some. So 24 degrees Libra, when that's on the ascendant, will be the time that Spica, pops up over the horizon. This is where Spica is located. So the idea of using heliacal risings for fixed star talismans is not necessarily what we'll call traditional, but it is an idea that fits in with sort of the cultural ideas behind calendar making and star mapping. And this is an idea that I got from a colleague of mine, Austin Kopic, who wrote about it in his essay on the celestial art, which is a really great book that you should pick up, as just sort of differing as an alternative to the typical, what we'll call Agrippin style of fixed star talismans, which is kind of how we did last time with Aldebaran. The moon conjoined it on an angle. This is just kind of a different idea, which matches in with different cultural ideas of the significance of astronomical appearances and risings and settings. So this is just sort of your alternative to a typical, what we'll call Spica talisman. And for Spica, her material are, for a stone we have emerald, and for a plant we have sage. And the image of Spica is a bird, or you can also use the glyph for Spica as well. And Spica, her purpose is to increase wealth, so we have finances, to escape poverty, which is really kind of special as far as talismans go. Spica is also used for overcoming strife and conflict. The kind of traditional wording is victory in a lawsuit, but that can go many different ways. There are many different ways people can be involved in controversy and without being straight up litigation. One final use, more from my own personal experiences rather than traditional sources, is that Spica is very good at comforting and nurturing and helping people kind of move beyond emotional obstacles or trauma and helping to kind of heal and comfort them while they do that. So Spica is really great for people who are going through really difficult times, either, grief or whatever sort of obstacle life throws at your way. Spica is really great at helping you have the emotional fortitude and giving you kind of the safe space to explore and overcome those. All right. So the third election that we're going to look at in this is going to be on November 2nd. We're going to move the date forward a little bit. For me, it's going to be at 2:22 a.m. So wake up early. This is Lunar Mansion Talisman. So this is going to be one that's really more focused on the phase of the moon than the previous two have been. Fixed star talismans don't consider the lunar phase as a very high priority, but Lunar Mansion talismans very much do. And so, like I said, this is a 12th Lunar Mansion talisman. And this mansion is more of a malefic mansion, and that's why we're using it during the moon waning phase, which is more focused on getting rid of things and, destruction if you wanted to be super dramatic. But this mansion is more focused on separation, and we can tweak it to be used more for separating from things that no longer serve us, or getting out of breaking bad habits or getting out of bad relationships, and kind of firmly setting boundaries in our lives for things that we're ready for and things that we're ready to move past. So for Lunar Mansion talismans, you want the moon to be in the mansion in question, and that's where we are right here. The 12th mansion ranges from 21 degrees Leo to 4 degrees Virgo, and the moon is firmly in that in 0 degrees Virgo here, almost in 1 degree Virgo. You also want the moon to be applying to a planet that is similar in nature to the purpose of the talisman. So here we wanted the moon to apply to a planet that could conceivably break something up and, fuck shit up. That's kind of our main goal. And to do that, we got the square of the moon to Mercury here. And Mercury is in his detriment in Sagittarius, which is not super great for Mercury, but is super great for fucking shit up. So we're going to go with that. There's also the added bonus here that Mercury is also the ruler of the ascendant, with the ascendant degree being 0 degrees Virgo. So the moon is applying a square to the Lord of the first house, which kind of firmly puts it on the practitioner or whoever is making this talisman with the intention to wear it, or whoever is doing this ritual, which kind of puts it on them to do better with and to overcome. Now, unfortunately, I talked about Mercury here being in detriment in Sagittarius, and that is definitely true, and that's something that the practitioner is going to have to deal with. When planets are in their detriment, they don't function at 100%. They tend to be kind of like incapable or corrupted influences in some way. And typically this would be an argument against doing a talisman here, but since this talisman specifically is for overcoming something or, moving beyond some kind of difficult situation, I felt that Mercury being in detriment kind of made sense for where somebody's attitude, to where somebody's kind of life circumstances may be at this area. If you're dealing with a destructive habit that you're trying to get rid of, you're probably not at 100%. So maybe you get to be signified by a planet detriment for once. That being said, though, there are other parts of this selection that I really like. The Lord of the 7th house here, which could signify a partner in a difficult relationship, is Jupiter in Scorpio. And Mercury is moving away from Jupiter and Scorpio, which I thought was really nice. Insofar as, Mercury is literally like by Felicia-ing this Jupiter in a way that matches. I can't spell Felicia. In a way that really matches the intention of the talisman. Another thing that I liked about this chart is that the Lord of the 12th house is the Sun. And the 12th house is about bad habits, essentially. Self-sabotage, things that we do to ourselves that, get in our own way. That kind of thing. And so the 12th house tends to have themes of, bad habits, alcoholism, drug addiction, food dependency issues, those kinds of things. And Mercury is similarly not in aspect to the Sun, and is, has freshly moved from the sign of the Sun, so there's no longer any kind of relationship between Mercury and the Sun. And I really liked being able to get this sort of double separation from two kind of difficult areas of two potentially difficult areas of life. Okay, so for our Western European version of this chart, we're going to go to November 2nd, so the same day, but at 8:05 a.m. So 9:05 a.m. Sorry, my bad. But at 9:05 a.m. And this one features very similar placements, except because we're in a different area of the world, the moon has moved, and so we have different kind of configurations going on here. And this is actually a chart that kind of looks good up front, but oops, well, you can see my parameters there for how I use this program. Go away, aspect patterns. Okay, so this chart is cat. So our Western European version of this chart is going to be for November 2nd at 9:05 a.m. And this is an example of a chart that kind of looks good or fits some of the criteria, but ends up not looking very good when you explore it a little bit further. So this is one that I wouldn't really recommend doing. So here you have a similar setup with the moon in the 12th mansion, which if you recall was from 21 Leo to 4 degrees Virgo. And the moon is having that same kind of square aspect with Mercury here at 2 degrees Sagittarius. So kind of the basic structure of the chart is the same. What's changed is kind of everything else. The moon is now at the midheaven, so we've shifted everything over. And the ruler of the first house is now Mars down here in Aquarius. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Mars is doing fine here. That's fine. We can have this here. He's just fallen off of he's just about to fall off the IC here. But the problem with this chart is that the rulers of the houses that we're trying to get rid of, they're both ruled by Venus, the Lord of the 7th house in Taurus and the 12th in Libra. So Venus here, retrograde in Libra in the 12th house, signifies sort of the things that we were trying to get out of. Either, we have like a bad relationship we're trying to get rid of, or a bad habit that we're trying to break. And the unfortunate part of this is, unlike the Central North America chart, where the Lord of the first house Mercury was averse or separating from the rulers of these two houses, Mars and Venus are actually applying to a trine here. Mars will, catch up to Venus, and they will get a trine at 26 degrees of Aquarius and Libra. So we're actually moving towards those things rather than away from them, and that's definitely not in the spirit of what we're trying to accomplish here. So that's why I wouldn't recommend this chart for Western Europe, and you're just going to have to miss it. Sorry. So our fourth and final chart is going to be set for November 4th. And you have to be careful here because on November 4th, we've actually switched time zones. We're no longer in daylight savings time for those of you who are in parts of the world that, practice daylight savings time and do that horrible mess. The 4th at 2 a.m. is when it ends and we switch back to standard time. So that's important to take into consideration because it changes things. But so for our chart here, whoops, too far. Our fourth chart is going to be set for November 4th at 10:57 a.m. And what we are doing with this one is actually kind of fun. So those of you with a good eye have probably noticed Saturn's position on the ascendant in his sign of domicile Capricorn, and this is exactly what our focus is. This is the chart for a Saturn talisman. For a planetary Saturn talisman, which is super great to have. Saturn talismans are something that we're going to see a lot of in the next couple of years, because once Saturn gets through Aquarius, we're not going to have a chance for another Saturn talisman until Saturn gets back into the sign Libra, which is a long time from now, like 21 years. So we're going to have to get while the getting's good. But yes, Saturn and Capricorn talisman is what we're focused on here. One of the first criteria that we're after in planetary talismans is that we have the planet that we're looking for, in this case Saturn, in one of their traditional signs of dignity. And for Saturn, that's going to be Capricorn and Aquarius, and luckily we've got him in Capricorn right now. One of the other things we need is we need either the day or the hour of the planet that we're after. So we would need either Saturn's day or Saturn's hour. November 4th is a Sunday, so we didn't get that. But at this time, at 10:57 a.m., we're in the hour of Saturn. So that's also checked. The other thing that we want is we want the moon to apply to the planet that we're looking for. So in this case, we want the moon to apply to Saturn, which is exactly what we get. We have the moon applying a square to Saturn. Typically, squares are not ideal, but because Libra is the exaltation of Saturn, what we actually have here is the Saturn receiving the moon in his exaltation of Libra, which overcomes and mitigates a lot of the problems from the square aspect that we might usually see. We also want to make sure that the Lord of the first house is well dignified, isn't going through anything difficult, and that Saturn, which we've already made sure everything's fine with. He's not retrograde. Let me see, he's not in a square with Mars. He's fine. So this is all fine and we can move forward. So what's interesting about this configuration is that we actually had a very similar one some months ago. And in the Greek Magical Papyri, which is a collection of magical texts from the Egyptian Demotic language, there is a section on the different magical applications of the moon based on the sign of the zodiac she is in. In Libra, she's supposed to be good for necromancy, and this is also a goal that we can use Saturn talismans for. So in the Chaldean cosmology, Saturn is on the periphery of the universe. On one side of Saturn, you have what we can see and directly observe and measure and that kind of thing. And then kind of behind Saturn, we have the kind of invisible workings of the universe, the realms of the spirits and angels, or whatever you want to call them, and the sort of metaphysical properties, what's actually going on behind the veil, or kind of behind the scenes when it comes to the working of the universe. And this is a thing that Saturn is very good at helping people uncover, deeper mysteries, existential truths. These are all really great applications for Saturn talismans if you're involved in any sort of kind of deep study on any kind of subject. Saturn is going to be your man for getting to the bottom and understanding it very detailed and very intricately. There are, of course, other utilizations for Saturn talismans. They can be used for longevity. Saturn is usually associated with old age. They can be used, I wouldn't really use it for health specifically, unless you have certain conditions in your birth chart that would make this a good idea, but it's possible. Saturn can also be used to help improve memory. And of course, there are many and more utilizations for Saturn talismans. So finally for today, we're going to talk about sort of the Western European equivalent of the Saturn chart that we talked about. And unfortunately, it doesn't really look like there is going to be one for a couple of different reasons. The first problem that we're going to encounter is that there's not a way to get Capricorn on the ascendant and have it be the hour of Saturn at the same time for Western Europe. The hour will have already shifted into Jupiter, and that's not okay. Even if we pushed it forward to try to do Saturn on the midheaven instead of Saturn on the ascendant, we're going to be in a sun day and a moon hour, which is also not good. Similarly, and probably our bigger problem, is that the moon at 3 degrees Libra is actually applying a sextile to Mercury at 5 degrees Sagittarius in 12 minutes, which is frustrating the attempt of the moon to make this square to Saturn by 2 whole minutes. So we're just not going to be able to get one for Western Europe at this time. So those are the 4 electional charts that I wanted to cover for this lunation cycle. We have 2 fixed stars, Spica and Aldebaran. We even have a lunar mansion and a planetary talisman. So there's a good variety of types to work with. So hopefully you find something that is aligned with what you're trying to accomplish for this 2-week period, or what you think you may need going forward. What you'll want to do is get your material ready and get yourself set up to go at the time of the electional chart that I shared with you. You want to get started beforehand, obviously. So if you have any questions or concerns, make sure to put them in the comment section below, and I'll be sure to get back to you. And then we'll see you at the Scorpio new moon.